Hey everyone. Get ready to be spooked with bedtime scary stories set on rainy nights. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps me create more of these stories for you to enjoy. Thanks for watching. When the first reports came in, no one believed it. People disappear every day, especially in a country as vast and diverse as the United States. But these disappearances were different, stranger, more sinister. They started in small towns, quiet places where nothing ever seemed to happen, then spread to cities, growing more frequent, more unnerving. I first heard about it on the news, like most people, but I never imagined that it would come for me. I lived in a small village called Black Hollow, nestled deep in the forests of Maine, a place where everyone knew everyone else. My life was uneventful, predictable, a steady job at the local hardware store, evenings spent with friends, and the occasional weekend trip to the nearby lake. My family lived nearby, and we were close. My younger sister, Emily, had just graduated from college and moved back home. We were planning to spend the summer together, catching up, hiking the trails we loved as kids. It was a humid afternoon when I got the first call. Emily's voice was trembling, something I'd never heard before. "Nate," she whispered, "someone's been following me." "Following you?" I repeated, my heart skipping a beat. "Where are you?" "I'm home," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I saw him, Nate. He looks just like you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "It was you, Nate. Or at least, it looked like you. But there was something wrong, something in the eyes." I didn't waste a second. I jumped into my car and sped over to her place, every nerve in my body on edge. When I arrived, Emily was sitting on the porch, pale and shaking. She ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck, her body trembling against mine. "I saw him, Nate," she said, her voice muffled by my shoulder. "I saw him standing outside my window, just staring at me." I pulled back and looked into her eyes. "Are you sure it wasn't just someone who looked like me? There's no way it was—" "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "It was you. Or at least it looked like you. But the eyes, they weren't right. They were too dark, too empty." I didn't know what to say. How could I? There were no words for something like that. I convinced Emily to stay with me for the night, to not be alone. She agreed, though I could see the fear in her eyes every time she looked at me, as if she wasn't entirely sure I was who I said I was. That night, after Emily had finally fallen asleep on my couch, I sat up in bed, unable to close my eyes. I kept hearing her voice in my head, replaying the words over and over. The way she had described it, the thing that looked like me, made my skin crawl. What was it? And why had it been watching her? Over the next few days, more reports started coming in. People all over the state were seeing their loved ones, people who looked exactly like them, lurking in the shadows, watching from a distance. But these doppelgangers weren't benign. They weren't just imitations. They were something darker, something malevolent. The first body was found a week later. A woman in Brewer, murdered in her own home. The police were baffled. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. But the most chilling part was the surveillance footage from a nearby gas station, taken just hours before her death. The woman had been seen getting into her car with her husband, only her husband had been out of town on a business trip. As the weeks passed, the reports grew more frequent, more terrifying. People were disappearing. Men, women, even children, vanishing without a trace, only to be found later, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. And in every case, there were witnesses who swore they had seen the victim with someone they knew, someone who looked just like them, but wasn't. The media dubbed it the shapeshifter, a name that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. The authorities were helpless, the public in a state of panic. No one knew who to trust. How could you, when the face of your killer could be that of your best friend, your spouse, your child? It was around this time that I started seeing things. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the stress getting to me. But then it became more frequent, more real. I'd catch glimpses of something in the mirror, something that looked like me but wasn't. Its eyes were too dark, its smile too wide. I'd turn around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? I was terrified that if I told anyone, they'd think I was going mad. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. Whatever was out there, it was real, and it was coming for me. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone moving around in my kitchen. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the baseball bat I kept by my bed. I crept down the hallway, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. When I reached the kitchen, the lights were off, but I could see a shadowy figure standing by the sink. My blood turned to ice as the figure turned around, revealing my own face. It smiled at me, a twisted, malicious grin that sent a jolt of terror through my body. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The figure stepped closer, its eyes, my eyes, gleaming in the darkness. "I'm you," it said, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "And soon, I'll be all that's left." I swung the bat, but it passed right through the figure as if it were made of smoke. It laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the room. And then it was gone, vanishing into the shadows. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching the bat, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. Not that night, anyway. The next day, I called Emily and told her everything. I could hear the fear in her voice as I spoke, the same fear I felt every time I looked in the mirror, every time I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. "Nate, you have to get out of there," she said, her voice urgent. "It's not safe." "I know," I replied, my voice hollow. "But where would I go? How can I run from something that looks just like me?" There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Emily spoke again, her voice trembling. "I've been seeing it too, Nate. It's been following me. It's not just after you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "It's been watching me," she whispered. "In the mirrors, in the windows. It looks just like you, but it's not you, and it's getting closer." Panic surged through me. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to protect her, to protect myself. The shapeshifter wasn't just some story on the news anymore. It was real, and it was coming for us. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom, locking the door and covering the windows. I kept the lights on, not daring to close my eyes. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind sent my heart racing. I knew it was out there, waiting, watching. And then, just after midnight, I heard it, the sound of someone moving outside my door. My breath caught in my throat as I listened, my pulse pounding in my ears. The doorknob rattled, and I gripped the bat tighter, my knuckles white. Nate. It was Emily's voice, soft and pleading. Nate, it's me, let me in. My heart lurched. Emily, I called out, my voice shaking. Is that really you? Yes, she replied, her voice trembling. Please, Nate, I'm scared. Let me in. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to keep the door shut. But it was Emily, my sister. I couldn't leave her out there, not if she was in danger. I slowly unlocked the door, my hand shaking as I turned the knob. The door creaked open, and there she was, standing in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. Nate, she whispered, stepping closer. Thank God. I thought I lost you. Relief washed over me, and I reached out to pull her into a hug. But then I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the way her smile twisted into something darker, something wrong. It wasn't Emily. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The thing that looked like my sister grinned, a cold, malevolent smile that sent chills down my spine. You should have stayed in your room, Nate, it said, its voice a mockery of my sister's. Now, it's too late. I swung the bat, but the figure dissolved into smoke, swirling around me before reforming on the other side of the room. It laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls, and I felt a surge of hopelessness, a realization that I was completely outmatched. Run all you want, it whispered, its voice slithering into my ears. I'll always find you, and when I do, I'll wear your face and hunt those you love. I turned and fled, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, had to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. But no matter how far I ran, I knew it was only a matter of time before it found me again. Because the shapeshifter didn't just kill, it became you, hunted those you loved, and left nothing but a trail of bodies in its wake. And in the end, who would believe you when they saw your face reflected in the eyes of a monster? They found Nate's body weeks later in a remote cabin near Black Hollow, his face twisted in terror. His sister Emily was never found, though there were reports of sightings, people who swore they saw her in the mirrors, in the shadows. But each time they tried to approach her, she would disappear, leaving behind only a chilling laugh that echoed through the empty halls. The disappearances continued, spreading across the country, and the stories of the shapeshifter became a legend, a warning whispered in the dark. And if you ever see a loved one, staring at you with eyes that are just a little too dark, a smile that's just a little too wide, you'll know it's already too late. Get ready for the next story that will send chills down your spine. I never believed in ghosts. They were just stories, tales spun to keep kids from wandering too far at night, to make campfires more exciting. Ghosts belonged in old books, not in the world we live in, with its deadlines, traffic jams, and all the mundane things that make up everyday life. But then, something happened to me, something that shattered my sense of reality and made me question everything I thought I knew. It all started on a crisp autumn night. You know the kind, The air is cool, just cold enough to make you pull your jacket a little tighter, and the trees are ablaze with color, their leaves crunching underfoot. I had just finished work at the local pub where I bartended in a small town nestled on the edge of Blackwood Forest. It was a place where nothing ever really happened, where everyone knew everyone else, and the biggest excitement was when the occasional tourist got lost in the woods. I was tired, ready to get home, kick off my shoes, and maybe watch some TV before bed. The path I took home cut through the edge of the forest, a shortcut I had walked 100 times before. It saved me a good 20 minutes, and besides, it was peaceful, a good way to unwind after a long day. But that night felt different. There was a stillness in the air that made my skin prickle, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to nothing more than an overactive imagination. I mean, we all get that weird feeling sometimes, right? When the hairs on the back of your neck stand up for no reason and you start walking a little faster? That's all it was, I told myself. Just a feeling. The path was darker than usual, the trees above blocking out most of the moonlight. I could hear the wind rustling through the leaves, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, but otherwise, it was quiet. Too quiet. And then I heard it, a rustling in the bushes off to my right. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was probably just a deer, or maybe a raccoon. Animals are everywhere in these woods, nothing to worry about. I kept walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I glanced around, trying to catch sight of whatever it was, but all I saw were shadows, darker patches in the already inky blackness of the trees. That's when I heard it. A heavy, deliberate footstep, much too close for comfort. I stopped, straining to see through the darkness. My breath came in shallow gasps, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Is someone there?" I took a tentative step forward, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. I was just about to chalk it all up to nerves when something moved in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and broad, moving with an eerie, unnatural grace. At first, I thought it was just another person, maybe a hiker who had lost their way. But as the figure stepped into a patch of moonlight, my blood ran cold. It was a man, or at least it had the shape of a man. But where its head should have been, there was nothing, just a raw, jagged stump, glistening darkly in the faint light. I froze, every rational thought fleeing from my mind. The figure stood there, motionless, as if it was waiting for something. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. People don't walk around without heads. It wasn't possible. And then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it began to walk toward me. Each step measured and precise. My heart was hammering in my chest. My breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. As it came closer, I could see the details. The torn, blood-stained clothes, the way its arms hung limply at its sides. But it was the stump of its neck that held my gaze, a grotesque wound that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then, in a voice that didn't seem to come from anywhere, but was all around me, it spoke. "I seek a head," it said, the words echoing in the stillness of the night. "A new head for my own." My legs finally responded. and I turned and ran, the cold air stinging my lungs as I tore through the forest. Branches whipped at my face, the path a blur beneath my feet, but I didn't stop, didn't dare look back. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, had to reach the safety of the village. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually the trees thinned, and I burst out onto the main road. The lights of the village were a welcome sight, and I didn't stop running until I was pounding on the door of the nearest house, breathless and terrified. The family inside must have thought I was insane. Babbling about headless ghosts and voices in the night, they tried to calm me down, told me I must have imagined it, that it was just the wind, or maybe a prankster out for a scare. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that it was real. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that headless figure, heard its voice in the dark. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad dream, that I had let my imagination get the best of me. But the disappearances started not long after that, and the whole village was thrown into a state of panic. 3 people vanished in as many weeks, all of them last seen near the edge of the woods. Search parties were organized, the police were called in, but no one found anything. It was as if they had just disappeared into thin air. The village was gripped by fear. People refusing to go out at night, locking their doors and windows as soon as the sun set. And then, one night, I saw it again. I was at home, trying to lose myself in a movie, when I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat, and I froze, the memory of that night in the woods rushing back with terrifying clarity. I didn't want to answer. Every instinct told me to stay put, to pretend I wasn't home. But something compelled me to get it up, to walk to the door, even though my hands were shaking and my breath was coming in shallow gasps. I opened the door a crack, just enough to see out, and there it was. The headless figure stood on my porch, its clothes dripping with rain, its body swaying slightly in the wind. The stump of its neck was raw, glistening in the faint light of the porch lamp, and in its hands it held something, a crude axe, the blade stained with dark, dried blood. "I seek a head," it whispered, its voice more menacing than ever. "And I have found one." I slammed the door shut, my heart racing, and backed away, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to fight something that shouldn't even exist. I was trapped, alone in my own home, with a monster on my doorstep. And then, as if in a daze, I walked to the window. I don't know why. I guess I needed to see it again, to prove to myself that it was real. But what I saw was even more terrifying. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face, twisted in fear. But it wasn't just my face, it was the headless figure, standing behind me, its hand reaching out toward my head. I screamed, and the reflection vanished. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, silent and still. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance. The next morning, I packed my bags and left Blackwood, vowing never to return. I moved to a city far away, surrounded by people and noise, trying to forget what I had seen. But no matter how far I go, I can never escape the fear that one day, the headless hunter will find me again. It's out there, somewhere, searching for a new victim, a new head to claim. So, if you ever find yourself near Blackwood, don't go into the woods at night. Stay on the roads, stick to the light, and if you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. Because the headless hunter is real, and it's always watching, always waiting, and it's only a matter of time before it finds a new head to claim. We've made it to the last story of the night. This final tale is the scariest one yet, guaranteed to give you chills. Hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the story. Your support means the world and keeps these thrilling tales coming. Thanks for being a part of our community. I've always been an outdoorsman, the kind who finds peace in the quiet rustling of leaves and the crisp, fresh air of the wilderness. The city, with its relentless noise and constant hustle, was suffocating me. When life's pressures started to weigh me down, I knew it was time to escape. I packed my gear and headed out for a weekend camping trip in the remote woods of Black Ridge Forest. The forest, with its towering ancient trees and winding trails, was exactly what I needed. I'd hiked these trails before, but I'd never ventured this deep into the woods. This time, I wanted to push myself, to find a spot so remote that I could truly be alone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense canopy, I realized I needed to set up camp soon. The light was fading fast, and I didn't want to be caught unprepared. I pulled out my map, scanning it for a suitable spot. There was a clearing marked a few miles ahead, but something about an unmarked path branching off the main trail caught my eye. The path was barely visible, overgrown with underbrush and framed by twisted, gnarled trees that seemed to lean in ominously. I couldn't explain it, but I felt an inexplicable pull toward that path. Without fully understanding why, I stepped off the beaten trail and ventured into the unknown. The deeper I went, the darker the forest grew. The usual sounds of wildlife began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. I told myself it was just the unfamiliar surroundings, but a sense of unease settled over me. I pressed on, refusing to let my nerves get the better of me. I'd camped alone in the woods plenty of times before. There was nothing to worry about. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small clearing. It wasn't the one marked on my map, but it seemed as good a place as any to set up camp. The ground was flat, and a massive oak tree stood at the center, its trunk twisted and scarred, as if it had been struck by lightning countless times. As I unpacked my gear, that unease returned, stronger this time. The silence was oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, trying to focus on the task at hand. After all, I'd come out here to escape, to find peace in the solitude. Maybe I'd just succeeded a little too well. With my tent pitched and a small fire crackling, I tried to relax. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames as they flickered and danced, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement in the shadows at the edge of the clearing, but when I turned my head, there was nothing there. Just nerves, I muttered to myself. You're alone out here. Nothing to worry about. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight against the night. The warmth of my sleeping bag and the rhythmic sound of the wind through the trees lulled me into a restless sleep. But it wasn't long before something woke me. At first, I thought it was just a dream, the sound of footsteps crunching on the dry leaves outside my tent. They were slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was circling my camp. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened. The footsteps stopped, replaced by the soft rustling of fabric, as if someone was dragging a heavy cloak through the underbrush. I lay still, every muscle tensed, my mind racing. Had someone followed me? Was it an animal? I cursed myself for leaving my hunting knife outside with my gear. Slowly, I reached for the flashlight by my side, my hand trembling as I clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the inside of my tent. I pointed it at the entrance, hesitating before unzipping the flap just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The clearing was empty, the fire reduced to smoldering embers. I exhaled, trying to calm my racing heart. Maybe it was just the wind, or an animal passing through. I had spooked myself for no reason. But just as I was about to zip the tent back up, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of someone or something moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I swung the beam toward the noise, catching a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting between the trees. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking with fear. I hated how vulnerable I felt, alone in the dark, miles away from help. There was no response, just the sound of the wind picking up, rustling the leaves in a way that almost sounded like whispered voices. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I should pack up and leave before whatever was out there decided to show itself. But something kept me rooted to the spot, a mix of morbid curiosity and fear. The wind grew stronger, and the whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent. My flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with it, cursing under my breath as I tried to get it to work, but the batteries were dead. The darkness closed in around me, thick and suffocating. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the dim light of the dying fire. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled out of my tent, grabbing my hunting knife from my pack. I held it out in front of me, my hand shaking so badly that the blade trembled in the air. "Stay back!" I shouted, though my voice was hoarse with fear. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, as if daring me to come closer. My mind raced. I could run, try to make it back to the main trail, but in the dark, with whatever that thing was out there, I didn't like my chances. I backed toward the fire, hoping the light would keep the figure at bay. But then it moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't walking. It was gliding, as if its feet weren't even touching the ground. Another step, closer this time, and I could see it more clearly. The figure was wrapped in tattered, dark clothing that billowed around it like smoke, its face hidden beneath a hood. A wave of cold air hit me, and I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, a bone-chilling cold that felt unnatural, wrong. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, filling my mind with 1,000 voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I had to get out. Now. Without another thought, I turned and ran. I didn't care about my gear, didn't care about the path. I just ran, blindly tearing through the underbrush, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Branches scratched at my face and arms, the ground uneven beneath my feet. But I didn't stop. Behind me, I could hear the figure moving, gliding through the trees with an unnatural speed, the whispers following me, chasing me, driving me deeper into the woods. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I kept running, the primal fear driving me forward. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees twisting and warping, the path disappearing beneath my feet. I was lost, disoriented, but I couldn't stop. I could feel the figure getting closer, the cold air wrapping around me like icy fingers. Suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath me. I tumbled down a steep embankment, my body slamming into rocks and roots as I fell. I hit the bottom hard, the wind knocked out of me, pain radiating through my body. Dazed, I tried to push myself up, but my limbs wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt, and the world spun around me. I could hear the whispers again, closer now, almost inside my head. I tried to focus, tried to pull myself together, but it was like trying to hold on to water. Then, through the haze of pain and fear, I saw it. The figure was standing over me, its face still hidden, but I could feel its presence, feel the darkness emanating from it. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now, as if they were coming from the figure itself. My vision blurred, my strength fading. I tried to raise my knife, but my hand was too weak, too heavy. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, and placed them on my chest. The cold was unbearable, like ice spreading through my veins, freezing me from the inside out. I gasped, the breath stolen from my lungs, my heart slowing, until it was almost still. The whispers stopped. There was only silence and darkness. When I didn't return from my camping trip, a search party was sent into Black Ridge Forest. They scoured the trails calling my name, but found no trace of me. My campsite was discovered abandoned, with my gear left untouched. But of me, there was no sign. No footprints, no trail, nothing. The locals spoke of the forest with hushed voices, warning of the unmarked paths and the dangers that lay within. Some said the forest was haunted, that those who strayed too far from the main trail were never seen again. As the days turned into weeks, the search was eventually called off. I was declared missing, presumed dead, another victim of the unforgiving wilderness. But the forest remembered, and in the deepest, darkest part of Black Ridge Forest, where no one dared to venture, a figure could sometimes be seen, gliding through the trees, wrapped in tattered clothing, its face hidden beneath a hood. And if you listened closely, you could hear the whispers, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind, calling your name.